So, session 3, taking care of the mad, bad, sad feelings. We go over with the parents, kind of how the kids are doing their exercise, what they can be doing in terms of coaches' tips. When you notice that your child is beginning to escalate into anger or descend into depression, encourage them to use their toolkit. You can ask some questions. Is that working right now to help you calm down? Is there something else you could do right now that would help? And again, you want parents and kids to get into some dialogue about what will sound like irritating nagging versus what's a prompt that the child, and when the child says, if you could say to me, and then give some words, then when the parent actually says that, it tends to go down better, as opposed to being that irritating nagging. Practice deep breathing together. It's a great way to kind of calm down at nighttime when you need to kind of keep the, the bad monsters from coming out just as you're falling asleep. It's a nice soothing kind of a technique. When the whole family is looking stressed, hey, let's take a break. Let's do some breathing. Let's everybody pull out a tool from our toolkit and just chill out a little bit here. So start to verbalize that, and parents can really model this for their kids. So we go over some examples with the parents of how that toolkit works. And then we have the parents come up with their own treatment. We have them do some treatment team exercises. So we want them to think about who is within their child's treatment team. So here you've got front and center the parents, the child, who at school, therapist, who's the prescriber, are there any agencies involved, anybody else? And you won't necessarily have somebody in every little area within this ring of support. And you may not need somebody in every area, but you just want to start thinking more broadly about who do we have as support, who's part of our team. And to think of it really as a team. No one person should be responsible for the total management. Who's on the educational team? Again, family and child are front and center. Who's the classroom teacher? Who in the school building is helpful? Are there any out-of-school professionals or agencies? Anybody else? So again, you've helped them think broadly about who are part of the resources, and then how do you achieve that? And there's the end of week 3. So session 4. Now, so the first 3 sessions feel much more didactic in nature, and then you're starting to shift more into skill building, starting around session 4. So we start talking about how those negative family cycles can happen. It's so very predictable to get into some negative ruts. This is the next place where I see the elbows go when I've got spouses in the room. What does she do? Look in our window at night? I actually don't, wouldn't want to, but there are predictable ruts that families can get into. So what happens? The child is overly sensitive. They're really preoccupied with themselves, understandably, because their symptoms are awful. The parent, what does the parent do? Reassure. Oh, honey, everything's going to be fine. Well, that doesn't go over so well when everything is not feeling fine. The negative behavior looks like it's being done on purpose. It really can look very purposeful when it isn't. The child wants to be in control, but expectations are not being met, and they're failing with their regular responsibilities. So the families have not read the DSM, but they've all read the family code book, and they come in telling us we are walking on eggshells. I swear nearly every family uses that phrase. We are walking on eggshells. And why? Because you're trying to prevent another episode of the child. Okay. And the families will go to extraordinary proportions to not set off the child. So I had one girl at the age of 10 develop a horrible psychotic depression, and she could not, by any stretch of the imagination, not that suicide contracts are enough, she couldn't even begin to say, I won't harm myself. So we really had to hospitalize her. She was just brittle, brittle, brittle. She was also an incredibly intellectualized 10-year-old, and didn't want to talk about feelings, just couldn't stand it. So I did with her what I would consider the most boring version of CBT I could come up with. Like, nothing really about feelings and warm and fuzzy, but the most analytic, boring therapy. I thought this would be the most appealing to her. It worked the best, but it still didn't work very well, and they dropped out of therapy, and they were just getting meds. This was at the age of 10. Now at the age of 13, her psychiatrist tells the family, the same one who met me in the library and said, when are you running that next group? So this psychiatrist very appropriately said, I will no longer refill your prescriptions if you don't go back to therapy. Okay, so she really set a limit with this family. So they begrudgingly, they had to see me, so they came back to see me. So this girl at age 13, I'm trying to get kind of picked up on where they were from before, and where the family system was this girl could be in the living room watching TV, and she'd say, hey Mom, I want a bagel. Mom would drop whatever she was doing. Not only would she fix the bagel, she said, honey, how would you like it? said, can I come and live at your house? Would you do that for me? You know, I like this. I would like that kind of like somebody always there to, you know, answer my every whim. This girl had turned into a monster, okay? An absolute monster. Whatever she wanted, the family did anything to meet her needs. And I basically, as politely as I could say, why are you doing this? And the answer I got back was, we will do anything to prevent her from being stressed. It's like, excuse me, but you're going to be stressed as a teenager and as like living life. But like getting your own bagel shouldn't put you over the edge. She really should do that herself. What is this about? But the family had gotten so sensitized, they had seen how awful it had been, and they were going to at all costs avoid that. Well, that turned somebody into a monster, okay? She was the most ODD spoiled young thing. And so getting that out of her, that's harder work than like never letting that pattern develop in the first place. Okay. So lots of very predictable problems that can occur. Kids who have bipolar disorder can have unpredictable behavior. There can be dangerous and violent outbursts. They can be agitated. They can not be very reasonable. This is not a time when somebody is manic. You're not going to have a nice conversation about, well, let's talk about what else you can do right now, because if they're too far up, it's not going to happen. Okay? And it looks like they don't care about other people. Now the difference is, if I have really bad conduct disorder, I don't care about you, okay? That's part of who I am and part of my pathology. And I can meet you in a dark alley and stab you and not really care, because I have like, if I have a real callous, unemotional conduct disorder, I really don't care, okay? But our kids with bipolar disorder can do some fairly horrific things when they are manic. And then when they come down, they are so remorseful. And that's where you really see the difference. They do not like what they have done. They didn't do it from any joy, enjoyment. They're miserable about what they've done, and you can see where that propels into depression, okay? So it's really, and that also helps keep the empathy, because kids are not choosing to do these horrific things. They really are feeling just propelled into it. We have to help them not escalate to that point, and that's where we can really get in therapeutically with them. So we talk with parents about the can'ts, the won'ts, and the combos. Question?
Do you ever, if the psychiatrist has suggested it, give benzos and suggest that the family give benzos as they see it get starting to escalate?
So the question is, do we ever try to pharmacologically stave that off? I would so much rather...
If the psychiatrist says that, do you support that?
If the psychiatrist is going to do medicine, I'm going to kind of leave that be, but what I would encourage the family, what I would talk with them about is benzodiazepines in the long run maybe aren't the best solution for your child. And if you're experiencing some, you know, if it's really pretty wild and woolly, and if that's giving you some immediate relief, I'm not going to tell you not to do it. I'm just going to tell you that we can definitely work on strategies as a family that you can start to nip this stuff in the bud and then put away the benzos. And I would strongly prefer for the child to develop the skill set to do it without the medicine. Right, yeah. So whenever we can, particularly with medicines like that that have some very negative potential ongoing sequelae, like to minimize that. Not saying it's not ever useful, but it's not the first tree I would bark up. It's one of the last trees I would rather bark up. So I'm going to really push on the behavioral piece first. Yeah. And with most families, as we kind of move them backward, we move kids backward. You saw where we did that, really recognizing the triggers, and we talk about that then every week. Kids really start to see their triggers and identify and recognize it further upstream. The whole point is we want to get them before they've gone up so high or spun down so low that they can't pull themselves out of the mire or calm themselves back down. We want to nip that thing in the bud, okay? And we usually make some progress with that. But that's a great question. And this gets to exactly to the can'ts and the won'ts. So what most parents can come in with some degree of sophistication, because every parent is the expert on his or her child. We want them to become even more of an expert by the time they're done with treatment. So we want them to start reflecting on what we call the can'ts and the won'ts. The can'ts is when you're up so high or you're down so low that you feel like you really can't bring yourself back to calm. Okay. The won'ts are that sort of ornery, oppositional, you told me to turn off the TV and come to dinner, but I'm not going to. You know, that you behaviorally sit on like you would behaviorally sit on any ODD behavior. But if somebody has escalated so high or they've spun down so low, they're going to need help getting back to the middle. Okay? So we try to keep it from ever getting to that point, and that gets back to breaking off the escalating cycle before it goes too far. Okay? And what people will talk about in the can'ts is it's like that look in her eye, or like she's vacant, she's gone, or he looks like a wild animal. The eyes are where the descriptions often are. Like he's just not there. I look in and I don't see the person anymore. It's that sort of a description. And that's when, then you just focus on safety. And at that point, and you don't worry about punishing afterward, you just work then on identifying the pattern earlier so that you can de-escalate sooner, so that you don't get to the can't point. The won't point, the behavioral, the oppositional kind of stuff, the I'm not going to come in because I'm really having more fun playing. No, you really sit on that behaviorally. But that's where helping the parents, but parents, their heads can spin because one thing works behaviorally, the other thing doesn't work behaviorally. How am I supposed to know what to do? That's our job, to help parents see what seems to be really driven by the mood and what is just a negative behavioral pattern, because the negative behavioral pattern you're going to slap down with the behavioral management. The mood piece, you need to help families develop the skill to nip it in the bud sooner. Okay. And if it's too far, you just focus on safety. And you don't rub their nose in it afterwards, because that is not useful. Okay. So negative family cycles, what happens? The family will try really hard to coax, reassure, protect. Child doesn't respond very positively to that. Family tries even harder. So what do we do when something doesn't work? We do more of the same. Sometimes we raise our voices while we're doing it. That's not very effectual. What happens really often is one parent will choose, and then where we'll go from there is parents will try different solutions, and then they'll start quarreling with each other. So you've got one parent who just says, that's enough, I'm done trying, and the other one says, no, we have to keep trying, and then the one who's done criticizes this one, and this one is busy criticizing this one, and now the kid's over here saying, phew, at least they're not yelling at me, and now they're just yelling at each other, but now you have marital tension, and this is where we see secondary damage coming in, where we see marital difficulties, and the kid's not getting any help. Okay, so it's not helping the kid, but it's causing a secondary problem. So the child feels more alienated, family feels rejected, family withdraws or gets angry or does both, family feels guilty, they go back to coaxing. The child is feeling unworthy, hopeless, infantilized, family burns out over time but still feels guilty and angry, and you end up with alienation and or overprotection, usually both, one from one parent, one from the other. And if you have separated households, then it can get really ugly, because now you maybe have 4 adults involved and everybody's got a different strategy and everybody's telling the other one why the other person's method isn't working. Okay? So now you have a big mess on your hands. So you need to get these adults together, see this pattern, and kind of start to change that process. Okay. There's a lot of parental burden. Parents will routinely experience, and for parents to start acknowledging this, the first couple of sessions, they're kind of typically keeping more of a lid on it and not doing a lot of personal sharing, but the more we go on, the more families start to really reveal what their own experience is like. By the time we get to this slide and this section of the group, families are usually starting to be more revealing about how difficult it is, and parents will, with their kids not in the room, they start to be able to honestly acknowledge, sometimes I can't stand them. Sometimes I hate my child, and I hate saying that, but sometimes I hate my child. Which is kind of relieving to be able to actually say that in a setting of supportive adults, because everybody in the room understands how you can sometimes hate your child. You love them, but you hate them, okay? And that's just the way it really ends up going. So families will have a lot of guilt, powerlessness, denial, anger at everybody, anger at the providers, anger at themselves, anger at their lousy ex-husband, anger at whoever is they're going to dump the blame on, the person who's driving in front of them on the freeway. They're anxious, they're fearful, they're uncertain, they're confused, they're blamed, they feel shamed, they're very isolated, and you go through a process of grief. Okay. I don't know any parent who was holding an infant saying, I can't wait till I get to take you to therapy and have med appointments when you grow older. It's not why we have babies. Okay? It's not the conception that people think of when they're holding that beautiful little infant. Okay? But that's what our kids can grow up to. So it's very difficult. So there are lots of problems, and these families are starting to then to really, within the group, gel and acknowledge this. So now what are we going to do about it? So we pointed out every problem that you have, every rut that you've fallen into. How are we going to help you get out of it? We talk about first holding and acknowledging the child's feelings. And I like to really do a little visualization exercise with parents and think about being a container. Because before you can jump into problem solving, you just have to acknowledge how lousy your kid feels. He didn't ask for these horrible feelings, but he's got them in spades. So first, just imagine yourself as a container. You might want to be a Tupperware container that's got that, really tight seal around it that you can go pop at the end and keep it all inside. You might feel like you're just getting slop thrown at you, so maybe you want to be a garbage can. Maybe you're a little artistic and you want to be a pottery bowl, but kind of a thick pottery bowl that can really hold a lot. Okay? So you're going to just spend some time letting them really think about some imagery of when I need to just take my deep breaths, I can imagine what container I am while my kid just dumps his feelings into me. I don't have to react. I don't have to respond. I don't have to do anything for a while, but just contain and hold the feelings, okay? So if you go back to your object relations and the holding environment, that's really kind of what we're thinking about for those of you who have some of that dynamic background, okay? So then you're going to break the cycle by becoming more aware of and then modifying your feelings, thoughts, and actions. So first you're just going to hold those feelings, and then both you as the parent are going to start changing how you react and your thoughts, which are going to change your feelings, just like it does for the child, and you're going to help prompt the child to do the same thing. So what is some of the very concrete positive strategies that we work on with parents? Remember, empathy comes first for yourself and your child. You didn't ask for this either. This is no picnic, okay? And you're going to have to keep doing it. So how are you going to stay in there? Notice how your child is feeling and respond accordingly. If the child is way too high or too low and they've just done something atrocious, just let it go for now. You don't have to come back to that and call them on it right now. Okay? When your child is ready to talk, let them talk. And what parents will typically talk about is like at bedtime, is one of those magical moments. Lights go out, covers get pulled up, and now the child starts spilling their guts. Okay? So that's a great time to sit and listen. Great time. When you're driving in the car, kids are in the back seat, somehow they don't have that eye-to-eye contact. It's a little less intense and you can start hearing things. Okay. So if that's the time, find a way to offer to drive carpool where you've got just your kid in the car, nobody else. That might be the magical way that it unfolds with your child. But you want to kind of build those opportunities into the day. Catch the child doing something right and give praise. It might be that other 7th graders are starting to go to school dances and are starting to become more independent with their homework, and they're starting to do all these signs that they're really growing up and developing. And maybe your child remembers to bring home his daily report card every day from school, which is like not where all the other 7th graders are, but it doesn't matter where all the other 7th graders are. It only matters where your 7th grader is. And if that's an improvement from baseline, that's what you praise. Okay, so always remember the child's baseline. And it's hard for parents because they're looking at the comparison cohort of other children their children's age, but their child's probably not going to be at that same level. Okay, so just accept that, because being angry or upset about it isn't going to somehow developmentally advance the child. Okay. Phrase instructions in a positive way. Instead of the "don't hit your brother," how about please keep your hands and feet to yourself. Every quarter we bring in new undergraduates into our lab because we have a lot of kids coming through and doing interviews, and so we've got families there every day. And we have to do a whole seminar on how to use positive language. And these are for, bright undergraduates interested in psychology. They're psychologically minded, but it's our automatic language to start with the don't do that, no. And just listen to the phrases you use that we all use until we kind of catch ourselves in our language. So turn those negatives into positives. Keep the environment and schedule as structured as possible. Mood disordered kids often greatly dislike change. So you want to have a very predictable routine. And once you have that predictability, you need to manage flexibility. So it sounds like I'm saying both things, and I am. Okay, so you need to be very routinized, but you have to have room for flexibility so that the parent doesn't fall off, doesn't fall apart when suddenly the routine changes. Build extra time into the schedule to allow for challenging situations. What you don't want, and you can't do this when a family's in crisis, because when a family's in crisis, they're just in crisis mode. But at some point over the course of therapy, you're going to want families to say, are we always operating at full tilt? Are we always at 99+% capacity? And if you are, figure out a way to de-stress your life if you possibly can. If the family income can afford it, can somebody cut back on their work hours? If you have both parents working 40 hours plus, can somebody have a little give there? Whatever it takes, be it mom, be it dad, be it whatever. But you don't want a family always feeling under normal circumstances that they're out on the edge of what they can tolerate. Because we know if there's one thing that's predictable, our families with bipolar disorder are going to have very stressful times. And if you're already at capacity, there's no room to go past that. You need that buffer zone to keep life feeling at least somewhat comfortable. Okay. So then we go over with the family, with the parents, how to support session 4, the thinking, feeling, doing, and what are some of the coaches' tips that we go over with parents. Helping them to start monitor the can'ts and the won'ts. So you've introduced this concept in the group. You want the parents to go home and just be thinking about that, kind of watching that. Well, is this when my child does have control or really doesn't have control? And how would I help the child get control? Okay. If a child expresses one of those hurtful kinds of thoughts, helping them to, say, is that a helpful or hurtful thought right now? Is there something else that you could think that might start to help you feel better? So starting to coach them in vivo. As we were starting to run these groups in lab, my lab graduate students would start saying to each other, now is that a helpful or a hurtful thought? As they were just kind of working on their own research and working on their own schoolwork. So it became the language of the lab. But that kind of coaching for each other. With other family members and support system, monitor the hurtful thoughts. And parents can start to monitor their own thinking also. Okay? So this is a powerful sort of an intervention. When we start monitoring our own actions, when we monitor our own thoughts, is there something more helpful that we could be doing right now? So then we have the parent, so we go over this for what the kids go through. And we also have the parents do the same thing. So now for the first time, up until now, in the first 3 sessions, we've had somewhat different, we've had family projects, but where there's a child or a parent project, they've been a little bit different. This session, we send them home with the exact same project. We want parents doing the same monitoring. And this exercise never ceases to amaze me. You never know what somebody doesn't tell you, but it's so impressive to me what parents fess up to. And the negative thoughts and the negative actions that the parents take can be very impressive. And the negative cognitions will be things like, he is doing this to drive me crazy. And then when they catch themselves, no, they're not. That's not why he's doing this. He's doing this because he's feeling really out of control and really scared right now, okay, or whatever. But once parents start to get awareness of that, then they will have more control over their thinking, their actions, which changes their own mood state. When their mood state changes, their child is in a much better place to be able to change his or her mood state. Parents oftentimes, our coach's tip number 2, parents often surprise themselves by how much they learn. The more effort you put into this, the more you're going to get out of it. So we really want parents to start to be more self-reflective. We give them an example, struggling through homework, and this came from one of our parents in the group, feeling frustrated and hopeless, yelled, gave up, and walked away. The negative cognitions, I can never get him to do his homework. I can't get him to do anything I need him to do. I am failing him. And that's where kind of that guilt, level of guilt. I'm a terrible mother. I can't possibly meet the needs of my child. He's going to fall apart, and I'm going to fall apart with him, is the kind of escalating negative cognitions that we get. So what did this mom turn around and do instead? Take a short, fun break with him, start with the easy stuff, and set small goals. Got her to change her thinking. Homework is his toughest time of the day, and he's tired after school. We can get through this. I just need to be patient and think positively. Okay, that turned it around. This mom then reported feeling a little more hopeful and a lot more calm. So we have them, parents go home and do the same thing. We have parents do the breathing. Session 5, we start working on problem solving and learning coping skills. What do we want parents to avoid? That rapid reassurance, honey, everything's going to be fine. Well, it doesn't feel that way right now to the child. Taking comments literally. The kid says, I will never be able to do this. And then you play it back in your mind, or I hate you. So when kids are really angry, they might say some very hurtful words. And if the parent takes that to heart and puts it on the repeat play button in their mind, and over and over and over again they agitate over that, that will eat the parent alive. So that is just not useful to do. Attempting to be constantly available and positive. So my bagel mother, okay, not a good idea. Feeling guilty for not meeting your child's every need. It's not going to happen. No child should have their every need met. You're going to end up again with a monster. Allowing the disorder to take over family life. The child's currently in inpatient unit. It's a crisis, and it's going to monopolize the family. Actually, it probably should, because if that doesn't bother the family, I don't know what would. But you can't stay at that level. It can't be, the world cannot constantly revolve around the child with the mood disorder. That's a very out of balance family. You also don't want to make big decisions during an acute episode. This isn't the time to decide, do we relocate? Do we get divorced? Maybe the marital tension goes way down when the child's symptoms become less severe. This isn't the time to make those kinds of big decisions, because parent will not be thinking clearly when they are intensely stressed. We want to create a balance and recognize multiple realities. Honey, I know that's how you see it, but let me tell you, this is how I'm seeing it. I'm not saying that either one of us is right or wrong. I believe that that's how you're seeing the world right now. I believe that you're seeing the world as just a horrible, crummy, rotten place. I'm not seeing it so bleakly, but we both have our own perspectives, as opposed to, that's not the way it is, which doesn't feel so good for a kid or anybody. Distinguish between the child and the disorder. Again, that's that symptom self-exercise. Be supportive and patient, but don't try to analyze why your child is depressed. The first time we ran a group for teenagers, we heard a couple of things. The first is, would you please tell my parents to stop asking me how I'm doing and how I'm feeling, and please stop monitoring my every move. Okay? But it's very irritating for kids to have parents constantly doing this. So this is where, on the one hand, we want the parents to help their child have some corrective behavior, but we want the kids to help kind of coach the parents on how they want to get some of that feedback. So you really want the parent and child to feel like this is not just the parent doing to the child. You don't want coaching to be that way. The child has to really be inviting the parent in also. So that's where you want that constant dialogue between parent and child. Decrease expectations temporarily without babying the child. That's the second thing that the teenagers say is, she treats me like a baby. Tell her to stop. Okay, so teenagers in particular don't like that. But if a child is currently really impaired, particularly when they're in a depressed phase and they're just not very productive and they're not getting much done, you might need to temporarily decrease expectations. But this is what we as therapists can really provide for families. We can give that independent outside read of when, really your son is doing a whole lot better now, and I think it's time to up the ante a little bit. Okay, so that's the kind of feedback that we can share back to parents. You want to remain hopeful. We have new treatments coming out all the time. I don't know that I've ever met a family where I've said, we have done absolutely everything, there's nothing else we can try for your child. Okay, there's almost always something else that we can try. Provide realistic support and reinforcement. Again, we want parents to really be providing that structure within the home and provide activity and structure. And also modeling, doing things to take care of yourself, getting good sleep, getting exercise, etc. Engaging in those healthy habits. Self-preservation. This is a marathon, it's not a sprint. If the parent doesn't take care of themselves, they are not going to be in there for the long run. It's not enough just to do 2 weeks of really good parenting. That's not going to get the child through the mood. So you've got to take enough time away to recharge your batteries. I have seen a shirt, and I wish I would have gotten at least a slide picture of it, but it said on the front of the t-shirt, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Okay? And that's a good philosophy. We've got to keep the batteries charged. If the well is dry, nothing's coming out. Okay? There's nothing left to give to the child if the parent's well is dry. So we've got to really have parents believe that they need to replenish the well in however the parent will do that, because otherwise they have nothing to go on. Avoid martyrdom and accept negative feelings. And the group is really useful for that, because parents inevitably will say things like, there are times I hate my child. And they're almost like embarrassed to say it in the group, and then all the other parents are nodding, like, I know exactly what you mean. Then the parent who finally fessed up is like, phew, boy, that felt good. Because there are very difficult moments. So you want to minimize the impact, and again, consider treatment. A lot of parents end up getting into their own treatment. And again, you see the elbow go when we do that first session talking about symptoms. That sounds just like you. Well, sometimes the other parent ends up getting into treatment, which is a great thing. Okay. So we want parents to think about symptoms and family conflict as problems that can be solved, and we work with families on how to be flexible and always include the child as part of the solution, okay, as opposed to, again, the coach is not implementing the plan to the child, they're working on the plan with the child, and that really is an important distinction. So then we go into problem solving. Who, what, not who, is the problem. So again, with the parents, we also spend a lot of time talking about defining the problem. It's not that my kid is doing terribly, but what's going on? What specifically can we start working on is the precise problem. Who needs to know about it? What are the solutions? What are the pros and cons, considering everybody's needs? Pick out a solution, try it, evaluate it. And what are some of the coach's corner tips that we have? Don't expect your child to come to you with a problem when it arises. Usually parents have to kind of help spot that. So help your child identify his or her feelings and the problem. You look like you're getting really upset. Let's take a little problem-solving break here. What can we do to make things better right now? What's really eating at you? Okay. And this really empowers the child. You're really asking the child what are some things we could try here to make it better. Okay. You are part of this solution. I'm not going to tell you what we're going to do. We're going to work on this together. And once the solution has been implemented, make sure that you evaluate it. And if it works, everybody gets praise. If it doesn't work, you've got to try a different solution. So we go back to the same this is what the parent will help coach the child through. And then we have the parent do the same kind of problem-solving exercise. So just like the last session, parents and kids get essentially the same exercise. Parents just look a little bit different. So in this case, the problem is aggression towards siblings. We've talked to the 2 kids involved, Jordan and Tiffany. These are the potential solutions we thought of. We go through the pros and cons. We could make them play together more. The pro, they would learn to get along better, but they could also fight more. We could not let them play together at all. They won't be as likely to get into physical fights, but they'll get lonely and they'll never develop a good sibling relationship. We could punish Jordan every time he hits Tiffany. He'll know that hitting is not acceptable, but punishment doesn't really seem to stop Jordan's negative behavior. When he's escalated like that, punishing doesn't seem to really work. We could monitor their play more closely. We could separate them as soon as Jordan becomes angry. They still get to play together, and Tiffany will be safe. But it's hard for me to get anything else done if I'm monitoring them that closely. That's labor-intensive on the parents' part. But despite that, they tried that solution, and this is how it worked. We limited their playtime, and we had them play in the kitchen while I'm making dinner, and I separate them as soon as Jordan becomes angry. Worked pretty well. We're going to try this one again. So we get the parents to kind of go through that process and incorporate the kids into the solution. We have them do their breathing. Session 6, we also work on communication with the parents. We talk about turning negative cycles into positive cycles. So we do this same 4 places work and breakdown. And we, again, have them think about the negative language that tends to come out and how can you turn that into positive language. Again, getting parents to really reflect and have awareness about what is coming out of their mouths. This is usually a pretty illuminating exercise for parents because you start to hear, oh, I sound just like my mother, and I hated when she said that to me when I was a kid. We inevitably get at least one parent in the group saying something to that effect. Or I hated it when my dad would always yell at me for, and now I'm yelling at my kid for. Okay, so you start to see those intergenerational patterns. We all parent the way we were parented unless we actively choose to do it differently. It's what comes by nature. Okay, it's what we know, how we were raised. So you're not trying hard enough. It looks like you're getting really frustrated. Would you like some help? Or this seems really hard for you right now. Do you want to do something else for a while and come back to this later? So you want to think about different ways that you can phrase things. Hurtful communication, and we go through some examples of some very hurtful kinds of language categories. Name calling or swearing, blaming, denying, giving up, what's the use? Okay. Mind reading, she thinks my idea is stupid. Trash collecting or bringing up old conflicts, you're just like your father. You never help me. You always work late. You ought to be home more like Karen's husband. Okay, well, but that's not going to accomplish a lot. Changing the subject, not listening, interrupting, speaking for others. Our child really wants me to help her. Giving lectures. This is a huge one. I like to remind parents of the Peanuts cartoons. So remember in the Peanuts cartoon where you never see an adult, you only see the kids? And what does the teacher at the front of the classroom sound like? Hopefully not the way I'm sounding to you anymore. I might be by now. It's been a long day. But they kind of never see the adult, but kid is really not hearing any real words, are they? When parents launch into a lecture, that's kind of how much the kid is hearing. So when parents will come to me and say, would you tell him that what he needs to do is, like, she's giving me the lecture so that I can repeat it to him, and he hasn't heard it from his mother, so why do any of us think that it would be helpful if I heard the same words and then said them back to the kid? I don't think I'm going to participate in that event. Thank you very much. So lecturing is a real no-no. So if you don't do that, what should you do? Again, first be empathic. Stop and consider what the child is feeling before considering what your response is going to be. Consider your timing when confronting an issue. If the child's in a can't moment, let it go for now. You're not going to be effective anyway. You're going to burn up a lot of energy, and it's just not going to be productive, and you're going to get angry that he hasn't listened to your good advice. Okay. Listen and look for the child's verbal and nonverbal communication. Again, starting with that notion of you're a container. Be the container before you do anything else. Be positive. That notion of kind of in that positive language, try multiple positive comments for every negative comment you make. Kind of try to, like people will do like the pennies in the pocket and move them from the left to the right or something. Just start to monitor how many times do I make a critical comment versus how many times do I make a positive comment, and really be aware of that. So it's raising a lot of consciousness in the parents of what they are saying that may not be so nice for the child to hear. Be direct. Venting to others is okay, but you also ultimately need to talk to the person who needs to hear the message. We work on assertive communication. X, Y, Z. When you do X, I feel Y. I would like you to do Z. Ask questions to make sure that you understand and are being understood. Do you mean you don't want to go to soccer? Am I making sense? The kind of questions. And making sure you got the communication going correctly. Do unto others. Speak in words and actions that in a way that you would like to be addressed. So if you don't want your child to yell at you, don't yell at your child. Take turns both speaking and listening. Pay attention to those verbal and nonverbal cues. Stay calm. And if you can't be calm in talking with the child, maybe you need to go take a break first until you can calm down enough. And that's perfectly acceptable. It's modeling to the child. I'm so angry right now that I can't even talk about your report card. I'm going to go take a walk around the block, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk about study habits. Okay, so if you need to do something like that, go do it. Humor, but it's got to be funny. It can't be that biting sarcasm that parents will pass off as humor that really, really, really stings. That is not a good communication tool. Be timely, address issues when they are small, and keep it brief and clear. Please move your backpack from the floor to your bedroom now, as opposed to, you are a big pig and slob. Would you clean up your act? What's that? Okay? So move your backpack, please, now to your bedroom. Clear, specific, direct. And then the paying attention to feelings. So we, again, go over with the parents some of that nonverbal communication deficits that their kids have and explain the rationale for why we're doing the nonverbal communication exercises. And then periodically, you can do a little coach's timeout hand signal and work this out with the child. How are you feeling right now? And I was a little confused. I looked at your face and I wasn't quite sure. Or, when I said that, how did you think I was feeling? So just do a little practice impromptu over the course of the week. See if they're correctly reading your cues. Yes?
What do you tell parents when kids go off verbally, how to respond in a communicative, healthy way?
So a kid starts really yelling and saying inappropriate things, mean things. So great question. So if the child is threatening or saying just evil, rotten things to a sibling or to the parents, this is where we want the parents to get a sense of where in that cycle the child is at. If the child is way up here and the parent has now been monitoring their mood symptoms, and they've been doing all these over the weeks, they've been becoming increasingly aware of how things progress. If in that child it's a sign of he's about ready to explode and all hell is about to break loose, if that's what those verbal exchanges mean, then I would focus purely on safety. And I would say, we'll call him Brandon. Brandon, it's looking pretty tough right now. It's really time to use the toolkit. And so let's say that going to his room, and maybe he trashes some stuff in the room, but maybe the parent has already removed many of the breakable objects from the room. How about if you go to your room right now? Okay, we all need to simmer down. It's really building to an ugly place. Goes to the room, calms down. If it's not that, if it's just words that he uses when he still would have some control, I would, again, you want to do as much of this ahead of time as you can. But if you can say, Brandon, is that helpful or hurtful right now, the words you're saying? What, and he kind of pauses a little bit and say, what's your real message here? If he just said to his sister, you are the ugliest, you're uglier than the ugliest dog I've ever seen, or whatever his insult is going to be, What's really bothering you right now? Who do you need to give what message to, and how can you use it using helpful words? Clearly, you have an important message to give. There's something really on your mind. What is it really? So if you've done enough of this preemptive work, you can't introduce this concept for the first time in the moment. It's never going to work that way. You've got to have done your preemptive work. But if he really has gotten the concept of helpful and hurtful, actions and thoughts. When he says something vile and destructive, he's feeling very strong emotions. And that's what's producing those words. Is that helpful or hurtful? What's really going on? You know, you cue him into really doing something more adaptive. And that's where you want this whole family dynamic to shift. So if now he is really seeing you as hard as it is to hear, and it doesn't always work in the moment, but he actually has fundamentally gotten that motto, it's not my fault, but it's my challenge, and you are on my side. If this far into the treatment, in his gut, he really believes that. And that's the critical transformative piece at the beginning of therapy we need to accomplish, or it doesn't work. The kid needs to really believe, and the parent needs to really mean, I truly am on your side. And I've probably made mistakes in how I've tried to help you, and you've probably done some things that have made matters worse too. But this is our chance to learn how to do it better. So if he fundamentally believes you're in his corner, then you can put those little interjections in, and hopefully he'll have enough calming techniques. And he's got his stop sign. He can do that. How does he stop enough to have it veer off in a different direction? None of this works 100% of the time. But let's say it didn't work at all when you start therapy, and now you're up to about 50% of the time working. Then in a calm moment, what you want to do is to reflect that back to the child. You know, we used to get in fights all the time. We had those knockdown, drag them out, dirty fights. They were happening like a couple times a week, almost every day. It was awful. Now look, oftentimes we can get through a whole week where we barely even exchange mean words with each other. Wow, it feels so much better in our home. And then reflect, what do you think you're doing differently that makes it go so much better? I think there's at least 3 things I can think of that I'm doing differently. What are the things that you think you're doing differently that's making it better? So everybody takes ownership of the success. And you want that kind of in vivo coaching. Yeah. So when you get families to start doing that, then you have really made progress. Okay? And that's a beautiful thing. Okay. So again, we get them to coach through some of those nonverbals. Have them practice their charades and understand why they're practicing the charades. And then for the parents, so the parents have been working on verbal communication. We want them to catch their unhelpful words. And if necessary, go back and apologize. Bradley, I was really frustrated. You left a big mess in the family room after I asked you to pick it up before the company arrived. But calling you names and screaming at you didn't solve the problem. So let the parents call themselves out if they've blown it. It's a great modeling for the kids. So I'm really sorry for the words that I chose to get my message across. I shouldn't have said those things. I'm really sorry. Okay. Parent says that sincerely to the child. The child knows that the parent is taking ownership too. It's not all about the kid being rotten. Okay. This really helps the child. And also later on say, Mom, I'm really sorry I said those. So let's say that this kid says horrible things to a sibling, maybe even apologizes to the sibling. Little easier maybe goes to the mom and says, I'm really sorry I said that to Rachel. Brandon, could you tell Rachel that? I think it would matter. It would mean more to Rachel if she heard it straight from you than if I go tell her. And a little bit of coaching, you can kind of usually get that to happen. You might start with the mom telling Rachel, you know, Brandon came up and said he was so sorry, but we're still working on getting that mood regulated, and I'm sorry that sometimes you bear the brunt of it, because it's nasty to live with, and I understand that. It's acknowledging where the sibling is at. Okay. So we have parents we call this out with the old, in with the new, and parents are incredibly honest again. Again, I never know what people don't tell me, but what they do tell me, it just blows me away. Stop that now or else. When did I catch myself? As soon as I saw my child's reaction. What could I, and then you want them to think, even if they didn't say it in the moment, looking back on it, what could they have said? I could have used a calmer voice and not threaten. Okay. You never listened to me. I didn't catch myself till the next day. I was reliving that moment in my head, and I thought, what did I say that for? Okay. So I could have said, right now I feel like you weren't listening to me. Okay. Just snap out of it. Well, there's a useful phrase. Yeah, that really does a lot of good. As soon as I said it, the words popped out of my mouth, and I thought, oh, what did I say that for? So maybe I could have said, I can tell you're feeling bad right now, and I'm also really frustrated. Let's just problem solve later. Neither one of us are in a good place to do it right now. That's calling it pretty honestly. Okay? I don't remember. I just remember screaming at him. Don't even know what I said. Once I calmed down, I remembered, caught myself. I need to wait till I'm calmer to talk with him about what's making me feel unhappy. Okay. So we have parents do this. And again, by now, parents who have really been engaged in this process, who are actively monitoring, are gaining a lot of self-awareness. And again, we keep pointing out to the parents, we're not blaming you either for your child's symptoms, but these are some things, if you do differently, I bet you're going to see some real gain in your child. Have them do the breathing. Session 7 for the parents is much more specific strategies. As I said this morning, we wouldn't let a psychiatric aide come onto our inpatient unit without giving them some specialized training. So why would we expect a parent to do this perfectly on their own? How do you manage mania? In the early stages, recognize that need for treatment. So again, if you've been depressed a long time, you're coming back up to normal, that's great, that's not a problem. But how do you recognize that the child is going up too high? And how do you immediately make some changes in the treatment plan because of that? You don't want to get carried away with a high mood. For a kid who has been irritable and depressed and down and the world is a rotten place and suddenly is like pretty happy, at first it can feel pretty good, but pretty soon it's going to get out of control. So you've got to kind of nip that thing in the bud. You want to avoid highly stimulating situations. And this is where we as therapists, it might look so obvious to us, but when families have certain patterns of interactions, that's what they're used to doing, and sometimes we need to kind of jolt them out of ineffectual patterns. So we had one family where this little boy had developed bipolar disorder really by kindergarten. And every summer they did this big family reunion. They would like meet at a hotel or something, and all kinds of cousins and lots of noise and activity and food and drink, and every year this kid would have some horrific experience at this family reunion. And I simply asked, do you have to go? Like, they had never contemplated not going. Well, every year it's a total disaster. Maybe you could think about this differently. So what the family ended up doing was one parent stayed home with the child. The other, the one whose family, immediate family, extended family it was, went with the other child. Great. That prevented a disaster. Everybody was happy. Okay? And that sounds really simple. And like, how did you not think of it before? But families get into their patterns of interacting and sometimes need a little outside, input to see it differently. Sleepovers. You're 13, you're in the 8th grade, you just had your horrible first manic episode, you got hospitalized, you are afraid. What matters more to an 8th grade girl than anything else in the world, right? Her group of friends and her social status. And you have been discharged from the hospital, you're afraid that none of your friends are ever going to do anything with you again, and then you get invited to a birthday party and it's a sleepover. What do? Do you let you as the therapist, and mom comes in and says, I'm really nervous. My daughter's been invited to a sleepover. She really wants to go. These are the girls she wants to be able to stay friends with, but I'm worried about her sleep. So what kind of advice do you give? You really don't want her, why do they call it a sleepover? Because you sleep when it's over. Okay? Okay? So this is not good for somebody who's just getting their mania back under control. So you negotiate it, but you negotiate it with the girl. You don't tell her the solution. That's not going to work. You've done your problem-solving unit. You know that's an ineffectual way. She's got to be part of the solution, so you talk it over. You could spend the entire session in therapy. If you're doing this IFPEP, can't do it quite with a group, but you could spend your whole session with a family working over this, because what really matters is that the parent and the child develop the strategies for how to communicate with each other, because these kind of problems are going to keep coming up. But how do you respectfully hear the input of all sides and negotiate it? So maybe the solution here, the girl really, 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 really wants to go, and the mother is really, 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 really nervous about what that's going to do. So you come up with a compromise, you stay till midnight, and then mom comes and picks her up and lets her have a good night's sleep in her own bed. Okay? That's a good way to kind of compromise. You still you get in on a lot of the good social stuff, and make up a story if you need to about why you need to go. Doesn't matter. You can have some face saving out if you need it, but work all that out within the session. Okay. So those highly stimulating situations. Caffeine, we see a lot for when kids go away to college. The first all-nighter, the first huge jolt of caffeine that they're drinking all night long and not sleeping. Another time that can be pretty vulnerable. Don't do that. Not a good idea. Taking away dangerous items, knives or other items. If somebody is getting very, very high and escalated and not feeling safe, you need to get the knives, the scissors, the medications all locked up in some very safe place. If you're really concerned that that's the next place that the child could go. Maintain a sleep routine as much as possible. Maintain all the structure you can. Meanwhile, if the person's mania keeps escalating, what you don't do is argue. Not very beneficial. If somebody's kind of not in your version of reality, arguing about that is just not going to work. And then after the episode, what you don't want to do is kind of rub their noses in it. You don't want to remind the child of what they've done unless they're not accepting their illness. So we had a boy who was 17, a high school senior, very nice, upstanding family. Again, they were a very religious family, kind of high moral standards, etc. This young man did some of the vilest things in our seclusion room. He needed seclusion multiple times while hospitalized. He was very, very ill, very agitated, and did some pretty vile things in the seclusion room. The dad was having a very hard time accepting that his son really had an illness that probably will be a lifelong illness. So then you have to start kind of increasing the descriptions of the very specific behavior that he did when he was manic. When the dad heard kind of some of the full story, he was absolutely appalled that his son could ever have done something so awful and wanted to know how to punish him. Like, no. We have no interest in punishing your son. He's suffered enough. Everybody suffered enough in this family. We have no interest in punishing. We just want you to realize that when he got very out of control, this is how bad the stakes got. Okay? And I don't think any of you ever want that to happen again. So that's a case where there's absolutely no need to remind him, and hopefully this is where you hope that there's some manic amnesia, because you don't want the boy to remember every single detail because it was awful. Okay. On the other hand, let's say we've got a boy same age who, when he gets out of the hospital, says, I don't need your blankety blank medicine. I don't have any problems, and you're telling me I have to take drugs, but you won't, you tell me that drugs are bad, but you're telling me I have to take drugs, which is not an uncommon argument that we get, especially from adolescents. And then if you need to remind him that at his Subway job, right before the hospitalization, he propositioned his boss and started to strip in the middle of the store while there were still customers around, maybe then you have to remind him what he did when he was manic, because he's not seeing the need for ongoing care. And you are really seeing the need to prevent that again in the future. So that's the only time that we would really just shove it back in their face, when you really need to kind of say, hey, this really is a problem, and here's what happened, and we don't want this to happen again. Okay. Managing depression, recognizing the need for treatment, really encouraging the child to use their toolkit. Again, choosing helpful thoughts and actions, choosing helpful communication, maintaining healthy eating habits and sleep routines and exercise. And we're going to talk more about healthy habits when we shoot over to the IFPEP model. Helping others in need, getting kids, as well as their parents, but getting kids to kind of move out of themselves and do something really kind and altruistic for others. So if this is a 5th grader, maybe he can go down to the kindergarten room and help some of those kids. Maybe if there's a classroom of kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities, maybe he can go over to the 1st grade classroom in their elementary building and do some help with those kids. Maybe he can go into a nursing home and do some assistance. Maybe he can, find something else that will pull him out of his own misery and do for others, because it's that kind of volunteering and altruistic behavior that can be remarkably useful for getting somebody out of their own kind of self-misery into helping in another situation. We had a girl who did our MFPEP group who had BP2. Lovely lovely parents, 3 girls. This was the oldest. The other 2 girls were just sweetness and light. And this girl had the most irritable, off-putting temperament that you could imagine, and also didn't have any interest in talking with me in therapy. Came to 1 or 2 sessions. We finally got the family into group, which was much more useful for, somewhat useful for the child, very helpful for the parents. She brought her hedgehog in to one of the sessions, and her hedgehog totally resembled her personality in therapy with me, like bristly and untouchable was kind of how we functioned. She got a little bit out of group, but she didn't really love group. Parents got a tremendous support out of group. But then the co-therapist in the group did some therapeutic horseback riding and worked with kids with developmental disabilities. And this girl loved horses. Well, we ended up making arrangements that this girl became a riding assistant. And the most positive and pro-social and best behavior we ever saw out of this girl when she was helping little children with Downs and autism ride horses. And that pulled the very, very best out of her. So that's the kind of thing that we can see in kids. Writing in a journal, not always, but commonly we will see that in girls as they're kind of approaching adolescence, but it'll also work for some boys and for varying age groups. But that kind of notion of kind of getting the poison out. If you've got poison inside you, you need to get it outside of you. And writing is one way that it can come right out of you, through your arm, onto the paper, and then it's gone. You can burn it, you can shred it, you can store it away, you can lock it up, you can do whatever you want with the paper once you've written, but it's gotten those toxins out of you. Spending time with a special person kind of goes without saying. So maybe grandma is a special person, maybe the retired speech therapist down the street is just the person who loves to be with kids, whatever. Uncle Jack, who takes the boy out every Thursday evening for guys' night out, gives parents some respite, great. Whatever kind of arrangements can be made. Creating a safety plan, this can be very important, particularly when kids still get particularly out of control, especially on that high side. And it's important to be prepared. I love this. One of the dads in one of our groups said, well, it's just like childbirth. Like you have to be prepared ahead of time. Like you pack your bag, you're all ready, and so then when your wife goes into labor, you know what to do. I love that a dad gave this example. So what we really work with families on is how to be prepared if you need this. And then if you never need it, great. But if you need it, you won't have the extra anxiety and panic over not being prepared when the moment strikes. So if there are siblings or other people in the home, you might need to have locks on the door. When the child gets really out of control, if he's not yet kind of under control and becomes physically aggressive, maybe the siblings want to be able to lock their doors and have a little safe place. And so we've worked with siblings on developing safe little cozy places within their own bedroom that they can go retreat to when the child who has bipolar disorder is feeling very out of control. Now the parent always needs to be able to have a key to get into the room so the child can never get locked in and not get out, obviously. Therapeutic holds, parents need to know either to hold or not to touch. So for some kids as they're escalating, a therapeutic hold ignites them more because physical touch from another person just sends them even more. But for some kids, it can be a very containing thing. So you need to know with that child what works, and if that therapeutic hold really can kind of help settle the child back down, then by all means do it. You want to have medication side effect information in one handy place. We really encourage families to create a binder that has all of the relevant medical history and treatment history all in one place so that if they emergently need to go to the emergency department, number one, they know which hospital will take them, they know the route to the hospital, and they can grab the binder and have everything they need, including emergency contact numbers, so they know kind of how to proceed with that. We also, and I was really nervous when I first started recommending this to families. I had no idea how it would work. But recommending that families make, if their child has symptoms that causes them to spiral and get potentially dangerous and violent, to have a preemptive visit with the local police who do the youth kind of police work in the precinct. And say, my child has bipolar disorder. There have been times when he's gotten out of control. I just need to know how best to contact you in the police station if we need assistance. Particularly if the child potentially needs to be hospitalized. What you don't want is a child in the car with only one adult driving on the way to the hospital if the child is pretty out of control, because we've had kids get out of their seatbelt and try to strangle their parent who's driving in the car, and needless to say, that's very dangerous on the highway. So at that point, you would need a police car or an ambulance to get the child to the hospital if it was that kind of spiraled out of control. So hopefully you don't need that, but what we coach parents on is what you don't do is use those false threats. If you don't cut that out, I'm going to call the police. You never say that unless that really is the next step you will take if things do not settle down. So that then if kids hear, if we cannot get things settled down here, I am going to need to call the police for assistance. Your dad's out of town on a trip. This needs to calm down. Kid doesn't calm down, you walk to the phone. First time the kid doesn't believe you're going to call the police, you really do call the police really do come. Hopefully you've had a positive coaching interaction. If you're really lucky, you've had the community intensive training for the police, and they really do a really good therapeutic job. I've had more positive police stories than negative police stories. I've been very pleasantly surprised, and we've had lots of families who've needed to do this. But after you've done it once, the next time it spirals to that level, and you say, if you cannot calm down now, I am going to need to call the police. Oftentimes that's enough to already bring the child down. It's like they don't want that, understandably. And it kind of jolts them just enough to be able to ratchet it down to move into using their coping. Okay. Suicidal concerns, again, if there's suicidal threats and attempts, you need to take those gestures very seriously. Remove available methods. We talked about locking up the knives, the guns, getting the guns out of the house, the scissors, any dangerous objects, medications, etc. Hospitalization is really used when a child is at risk to self or others. It is not respite for the parents. It's not meant as respite for the parents. It might provide some respite, but that is not the reason, and the reason that kids get into the hospital. It is usually brief. It is not punishment. If you don't cut that out, I'm going to send you to the hospital. Well, number one, I don't know what your emergency departments are like, but in ours, you can spend a long time. It's a very unpleasant place to be. It's a place you would rather not be at. So we really don't use that as a punishment or a threat. It's used only when that truly is the next step that would need to happen in terms of the continuity of care. So we want parents to understand what that continuity of care is and when to appropriately call out for those levels of service. What are some of the needs of family members? Siblings easily could feel resentful, angry, very embarrassed. Last time I had a friend over, my brother pulled his pants down and exposed himself. I'm never having friends over to the house again. Okay? How are you going to help that child really go on and have kind of normal friendships and play? Jealous, scared, isolated, lonely. They need somebody to address their needs. So they need somebody that they can talk to. And if the parent is feeling absolutely overwhelmed, which is very understandable, maybe another family member is the person. Grandma or grandpa, favorite aunt or uncle, family friend, somebody in the religious youth leader, a special teacher at school, guidance counselor at school, somebody that the sibling can talk to. The spouse or partner may feel the same laundry list of feelings, and you really want the parents to be able to share to some degree in the parenting. It doesn't always work that mom does most of the child rearing, but that's the most common way that we see families functioning in our culture. So it is common that moms will get the heavier load with this. We want enough sharing so that mom doesn't get resentful, or whatever parent is doing the lead parenting on this, so that there's some respite and a shared understanding. You don't want secondary damage from this. It's enough that the child is suffering, that the parent and child dyadic interaction is suffering. Adding marital tension in isn't going to help anybody. Nobody wins. So you want to do some preserving time for each other. Again, this is a marathon, not a sprint. We want families to step back when they're not in crisis mode and analyze how much stress can they manage. Do they need to figure out a way on a much larger systemic way to back off on the tension? What can they do to make life a little bit simpler? And here's where we really work with parents on taking care of themselves. Are you sleeping enough? This is a free medicine, okay? Doesn't cost anything. Are you eating appropriately? Are you exercising? Are you modeling having fun? Are you planning fun activities for yourself, for the family? Are you trying to keep kind of going on with that? What are you doing to maintain your own support system? You deserve it, you need it. What's out there for you? Is it a professional therapist? Is it saying every evening I get a 15-minute phone call with my sister and no one's going to interrupt me, and that's that. If I lock myself in the bathroom, that's what I get. Whatever it is that works for the family, families need this to keep themselves going. Meditating or praying, a wonderful way to stay centered and to kind of help preserve that sense of who am I as a person. Okay. And maintaining a sense of humor, because if you're not laughing, chances are really good you're going to end up crying. And laughing really feels better. Okay. Gets those endorphins going. Remain hopeful. It is very unlikely that a parent will have exhausted every possible treatment option, even if it feels like it on a bad day. Okay. And that's where we as clinicians can be good sounding boards and can give families ideas of what can they try next. New treatments keep being developed at a rapid rate. Lots of typical problems that a family might need to solve that we will, if they can't think of, so in this session, if families aren't thinking of kind of final questions to be asking, we can prompt them, but usually by this point in the group, parents are really good at coming up with their own ideas. Then we talk with them about how to do that let's talk exercise. Pause before you speak, don't just react. This is really important. And again, as parents are doing that out with the old, in with the new, they're catching where they're really blowing it with their verbal communication. Consider more helpful communication. Have them ask themselves, is what I'm about to say going to make the situation better or worse? Issues shouldn't be skirted around or ignored. They've got to be addressed directly and worked with respect. Everybody deserves respect. Anything that needs to be said can be spoken respectfully to anyone. That's just a useful strategy for all of us in life, but when parents are really caught in stressful moments, that's a very good rule of thumb for them to remember. And encourage the kids to follow the same steps. So going back to the evil language, that is not helping you get what you want. Can you use some more helpful words to get your point across? Okay. What are you really wanting to accomplish here? And are those words helping you get what you really want? Think about it. Okay. And then from the previous session, help them use their problem-solving skills to improve communication. And then here's this example again. Then in the final session, we do an overall wrap-up, give them some additional resources, and we have that nice graduation ceremony. We give them all kinds of resources, just like you saw, and we give them all their exercises.